all of
Hold
us.
on.
How's that sound?
Sport and Patagogue.
Hold
Yeah.
that thought.
To be continued. This is my
Oh,
Thursday
your
night
ski
ski
team.
team.
Yeah.
Are we live?
The idiots?
We all set, Chad? Okay. All right, we're ready.
expect to
All
see
right.
that as
I'd like to
an
call
annual.
to order the meeting of the Hopkinen School Board on Thursday, December 19th, 2019 at 5:32 p.m. All rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome everyone tonight. Thank you for coming out in the cold. Any additions or deletions to the agenda?
We do have a revised agenda. It was distributed to the community and to the board, but just to review, we're tabling the introduction of the owner's project manager and our engineering architecture firm and the recommendation for a construction management firm to January 2nd. Because of that, I added a building committee update, so depending on when Jim arrives, either Michelle or Norm are welcome to do that. The policy committee sent policy JICI weapons on school grounds for a second reading, so that's been added. And we put a donation for the playground, but that is below the $500 limit, so that is just a notice to the board and thank you to Tween School and Home for a donation, but because it's below the limit, there's no action required, so we can table that action item.
Great, thank you. Any correspondence?
There were two correspondents in the correspondence folder. One, board member Norm Goupel reached out to a community member, and the reply about some class I stuff is there. Norm asked me to provide that to the board. And today we got just an email appreciation from Mr. Nato on the board's work on JICI. He's appreciative to the board's work on JICI.
In the packet was one set of school board meeting minutes from the regular school board meeting held on December 12, 2019. I'll entertain a motion to approve those.
So moved.
Seconded.
Any further discussion on those minutes? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. At this point, there's a first opportunity for public comment for those of you who are here this evening. If you'd like to step up to the microphone and just give us your name and provide any input to us, it's greatly appreciated. We also have another opportunity toward the end. If there's anything in the agenda of the meeting that you would like clarification on or provide input on. Everybody all set right now? Okay, we'll keep on rolling. Comments from the Hopkins School Board. Charles, let's start down there.
Nothing really other than just saying I hope everyone has a nice break and happy holidays.
Great.
Yeah, basically the same thing.
And you're ready to be out for a week or so, right?
Yeah.
A week and a half or so. Good. Bill?
I don't have any comments at this time.
Great.
My comments is Merry Christmas to all of you. I hope you have a fantastic Christmas and Happy New Year. We'll get together at the beginning of the new year. So,
Great, thank you.
Congratulations to Grandpa Bill. Thank you very much. Yeah, my wife saw you this week and said that you were glowing. Yeah, very
Steph
proud.
Glow.
Very proud Grandpa. So,
That's awesome.
congratulations. Thank you. That's awesome.
I would just like to thank Steve and Michelle and the entire administrative team. This is one of the most challenging times of the year for everybody, because in addition to doing their regular responsibilities, we have, of course, the budget season, negotiations amongst other things, building committee. I think recognizing them for the amount of time, effort, energy, and care that they put into their work on a day-to-day basis, and keeping level heads and reasonable mindsets is not always easy during this time. So I wanted to personally thank them for all the work that they've been putting in, the extra hours and the effort. And just know that everything I'm confident that is being reflected and coming from them is done with incredible thoroughness and care. So at this point, we'll move on to presentation and staff reports. The revised agenda, of course, has the first two things struck, as Steve mentioned, on the recommendation from the building committee. So we'll move right on to the scenarios for the budget that we asked Steve to explore.
A copy of the slides are coming around. And then I will. So just to review where we are.
You're going down.
2 weeks ago, we talked about the operations side, what we do. Last week, we talked about revenue. Trust. There you go. A little bit of adjustment. Hey, you're welcome. And the board, at the end of the last meeting, had charged, what would it look like to reduce 5 teachers, one at Harold Martin School, one at Maple Street School, 2 at the middle and high schools, and 1 district-wide on special education, just to start really taking a look at, even in either previous to the tiers or in lieu of the tiers, just take a look at what does it mean. Our budget, as you remember, is 81% benefits and salary. And so one thing, I appreciate, Liz, thank you for your kind comments. And also for me, I've sat around the leadership table in this district for over 20 years and gone through years where we try and take a look at, try to prioritize and try to do. And without exception, and especially this group, it's extraordinary professional how we take a look and try to prioritize and try to take a look and try to minimize impact on kids. No one ever says, oh, high school gets this, and Maple gets this, and Harold gets this. And it's an extraordinary professional experience. It's a difficult experience. It is one of the least enjoyable things we do is taking a look at fundamentally changing our district. But this group of professional educators who care deeply about this district do it with real care and integrity and collaboration about what's best for kids district-wide. And for that, it is my honor and my privilege to work with these fine people. So a little bit about, and I was actually talking with Matt today. I remember when I stepped, one night I was a high school principal, the next night I turned into the superintendent of schools. And one of the stunning things I learned in that first year was how regulated this position is and this district is from this standpoint. So as you start to look at staff reductions, it's important to look at under what rules or regulations we can make these. We cannot simply come in and say, we're going to do this and change this. So there are 4 basic regulatory bodies that guide work in this area. 307C, New Hampshire minimum standards. So New Hampshire has minimum standards that we have to adhere to get state school approval. The minimum standards are in, for example, in class size. It says from K to 2, you can go as high as 25, but strive to get to 20. And we take this stuff seriously. So you can't really start before a year or more than 20. That would be a violation of minimum standards. They govern what programs the middle high school. Chris, if you wanted to, said, Steve, I want to eliminate these 3 programs. Well, the minimum standards require we offer certain things. Now, what does this mean? If you violate the minimum standards, do they hold back a check? No. I mean, this is more of what we commit to as a district and what my credential says as superintendent I must implement. Certification. Teachers, like I can't take a 7 through 12 teacher and have them teach a 6th grade class. We can't have a math teacher teach 2 English classes. We are governed by certification. We can only have teachers teach for classes they're certified for. You can teach at the secondary level outside of one out of district. I always had this dream of teaching a sports literature class, to be honest, when I was a high school math teacher, because I really love sports and all that fun stuff. They never let me, which is probably understood, but I always had that dream, and I could have within the regulation. Amy and I spoke quite a bit. One of the things is that as we talk about the transition or one approach to Maple, it has to align with certifications, and she watches that very closely because that's her expertise. So certification impacts what kind of transitions and transfers we can make. The CBA, the collective bargaining agreement, the contract. The contract has very specific language about reduction in force. So if the board makes a decision that we are going to reduce staff, then we have to follow the guidelines within the collective bargaining agreement. That's different if we are terminating someone for cause. If we have cause, that's different. But if we're reducing because of budgets or reductions in class size, we have to follow the CBA. One of the things is the classification. We classify teachers, some areas 7 through 12 or K through 6. I can't move, I can't combine and do some things there very regularly. The other piece, and we spent a lot of time talking about NEAS last year, the New England Association of Schools and Colleges. Chris is required by his credential in the commitment to a certified body that if there's a substantive change, we eliminate a guidance counselor, we eliminate 2 languages, he has to report certain things by honor, by his credential, by his commitment to NEAS, and that would in fact, that could impact our accreditation. So all that stuff goes into all the decisions that we can make. Do we align with the minimum standards? Is someone certified? Does it follow the contract to prevent a grievance? And is it a substantive change that could endanger our already on warning status? Could it be worse? And also, it's not trite and it's not little up there. We also are governed in this district by my 21 years of being under 2 superintendents and working with a lot of mentors. We also are governed by doing the right thing. And we try to always do the right thing. Every board meeting, we really try hard to do the right thing. So that's a little bit about just the environment that we have to take a look at this. I also, a couple of years ago, I added this to my opening speech, my opening presentation. But I do want to talk about briefly for the board and the public this notion that it is a public school system. And when it's a system, that means they're interconnected. That means one impacts this. So when we start taking a look at that, what we're talking about tonight is reducing our teaching workforce by 5%. We have about 100 teachers. If you take 5, that's a 5% reduction in our teaching workforce. To say that that in isolation won't have impact in other areas of our operations, I think would be disingenuous for me. So, for example, you're going to see a recommendation about reducing some reading. Well, if we don't have reading, does that impact special education? Does that mean some of those kids who need it now over to special education? You're going to see reducing special education. Does that mean we don't have the other areas to pick it up? We're going to see an approach tonight about reducing significantly the number of electives at the high school. That's more study halls. More study hall means more behavior. More behavior means it changes Chris's and Rebecca's work, because it is all connected. So as you look at these in isolation, understand that this is a system. Nothing happens without impacting others. And it's important for me just to throw that out there. So what did we do? Again, the charge was, what would Harold look like if there was one less teacher? Very unpleasant for Mr. Crowe. He's been doing this for a long time. So one of the things is we looked at, could we take second grade and divide by 3? Well, second grade, if we divided by 3, would be already over 20. So we would be a violation of the minimum standards. So we can take third. We already did that. Third is divided by 3. Third grade is different. That's over 21, and that's within the minimum standard. Second grade, if we said today that we are saying today would be over 20, I do not believe that meets the notion of striving to be under 20. So we can't take a classroom. So there, it's got to be numeracy support or literacy support. So a 1.0 teacher, we would take the 0.6, which is eliminate all the numeracy support at Harold Martin School. That would be about 15 hours of contact time with kids. Currently now getting numeracy support. Literacy would be 2 days, about 10 hours per week. So we would lose 10 hours of work in literacy with kids in the literacy area. That would be the impact. And that would be, for us, the first time in 7 years that we don't have numeracy support down there, or 6 years-ish. And the least amount of literacy we've had at Harold. Obviously, those are key components. But that's what it would be. Now, in full transparency, and I sent this in a memo to the board, right immediately, Bill was like, oh, can I do something else? So if this really came, we would probably look at something like an assistant at the library and move that. But the charge was teacher. So this is, if you said a teacher would go, but we would certainly work hard to maintain those essential areas. But there's only so far you can go. Everybody with me? Let's talk about Maple. So Amy and others have made this decision that we believe the best content delivery model at the 6th grade, as they prepare for the 7th and 8th grade model, is to go to a content specialist model. An English teacher, social studies teacher, math teacher, science teacher. So based on where we are in enrollment, what Amy knows deeply about the student population, what's best for kids would be to fundamentally change our 6th grade delivery model from a 4 content area to a 3-person team. This would reduce, we'd have 50% less science and 50% less social studies. We would pick up a little bit of social studies because you write about social studies and put it in literacy. But it would be making a decision about changing fundamentally what we believed in about content in 6th, 7th, and 8th, and changing it to a 2-person team and reducing science and social studies by a significant amount. That is, all of these are struggles. It's supposed to be, right? If this was easy, we would have done it the last few years because we've kind of been doing this for a while. But so it would be a fundamental change in pedagogical approach in a content delivery model, that's how we would take one less teacher of English. So the middle and high school. So this is, so the charge here was 2 full-time teachers. And so what Chris and Rebecca met and chatted with me about was eliminating additional contracts, any expansion, and then taking and having, and basically going as far as you can and realizing you have to go further and then taking reading support. So we would lose 1/5 of math. We would lose 1/5 of English. We would lose 2/5 of science. So the math would mean that offerings, it would change the number of sections offered. It may be increased class size, or it may, no one would take the 2 new semester classes. English, it would be increased class size. We would squeeze a grade level to a different, to a different configuration. So that would be, English would be an increase in class size. And as I talked about last week, and I think maybe supported in what Norm provided, one of the things about class size in English is feedback. The more kids you have, the less feedback typically you get. And that is a key, one of the high leverage practices in improving in writing. Science would be 2 year-long courses would go. Either ecology or GIS would not be offered next year. And we would reduce chemistry by 1/5, realizing that no sophomore can take chemistry, which would be a fundamental shift in philosophy about what we believe about science, what we believe about choice. So this would remove either GIS or ecology for our youngsters and prevent sophomores from taking chem. Reading would be about 16 hours less contact time with students. It would require a fundamental change in our reading program and our intervention. We're reducing that in half. Though, and Amy, I think, someone said it, I think Amy and I are both math people, but we both understand literacy is maybe a little bit above our math passion. So it is, if you know we're getting to, if we are recommending a reduction in reading, that means we're going pretty far. Because reading is absolutely one of the most fundamental skills that we can have. That would be more study halls and reduce the program. Music, more study halls, reduce the program. We're talking about steel and wood, we're talking about 1 less lathe. Art, to reduce art, we have squeezed art over the last few years. Though I believe in all the unified arts. Part of some of our training around this table was Dr. Ayers. And one of Dr. Ayers' passions was making sure we had the expressive art for youngsters. And if the board took this as a cut, 1/10 of art, I think it would be the least amount of art we've offered in my 21 years in the Hopkins School District, which I struggle with it all, but I always think of sometimes he's watching over and said, I don't want to disappoint Dr. Ayers' his memory. And so, anyway, that's a little bit about me and my madness. Family consumer, again, more study halls have reduced. This family consumer was added because we had 35 students on the wait list to take it. And so that would be saying those 35 kids, or at least half of those kids are out. Social studies would be 1/10. It would be reducing of an elective, while a required elective, a choice elective. Physical education, it would be an increase, but we moved this one, if you remember during my opening presentation, we pushed this to this year, and we do have a graduation requirement. And full transparency is something the board could do if they wanted to change a policy in reaction to a budget restriction. What Charlie and Ellis have talked about before, right? Having a 2nd or 3rd interscholastic sports doing a graduation requirement. I'm not so sure it's the best approach, but yes, that is something the board could change a policy and maybe mitigate that one. In business, we would reduce business. That would be an accounting class or a small business class or an entrepreneurship class. So that's the middle and high school. Again, class size choice. As I talked about, if you take ultimately, let's 20, 40, 80, 95, 115, 135, 150, 170, you're talking about 200 seats of class. By doing average class size, what I just did was the number of seats. If you took all these, there would be about 200 seats less of kids in opportunity in those classes. You follow what I just did? Everybody okay? Picking up what I'm putting in? And of course, there's a reading. Special education. Special education is a difficult one to project. So how Becky would handle this. So one of the things that I talked about, and what I appreciate, special education is a different way to determine a workload, caseload, and how do you do fairness and how do you do it. So I like picking up the phone and calling Becky and asking her because she's really smart and she tells me really smart stuff, so I can sound really smart. So there's 3 ways to determine special education course load. One is if you're working with very intense youngsters, right? So if we have 10 kids really intense working with someone, and then we have to reduce, is it now 15 kids? So that's a piece of it. The other piece is how much instruction do they do? How much are they either team teaching or individually delivering instruction, taking a look at their schedule? And the third is how many youngsters do they case manage? Those are the 3 areas. If we reduce by 1, all of those areas could be impacted. We might have the intensity of student need increase, we might have more instructional increase, or we might have case management. So, how this would work is we expect there to be some attrition district-wide in this department. We don't exactly know where or what building, so that we would take it by attrition, and then we would align and adjust need to mitigate the risk. Now, why I say risk, because if there is a risk, if we don't follow a legal binding document, then that opens the district up for causes, a cause of action. And the more we press on those 3 areas, the likelihood or probability of increasing our risk for a cause of action increases. It's not scared straight, it's just life. That's what it is. So that's how we would adjust to a 1.0 in the district. And we do have some flexibility between the K-6 and some flexibility 7-12, but we lose a lot of efficiency if we reduce a teacher here and then say, Bill, you got to send a halftime up here. Those schedules don't align, and of course you have transportation, but it's conceivable. What we can't do is force someone from the high school down here because they're classified 7-12. So that's how we would handle the district-wide special ed. Everybody okay? So on that memo and those what I just described, if you took them all, if you took the 0.6 numeracy and the 0.4 literacy at Harold, you took a teacher, full-time teacher, 6th grade, and moved at Maple. You took math, English, science, social studies, wood, art, family. You took them all. And the 1.0 special ed, that would be a total of $513,115. And thank you for Ms. Michelle for crunching those numbers today. So that's what you would get for that. Everybody with me? Everybody okay? Now, this is the most thing what we have as teachers, so certainly some of this would happen, but there would be lots of discussion about what can we save in other areas. This is really looking, as the board asked, just at teachers. But we'd be open to looking at something else. It was just between last week and this week. You with me or against me? Now I can't, and I don't mean to be, I think Liz, when she spoke to me about this, I don't mean to be dramatic. But I also can't in good conscience talking about a 5% reduction in our teaching staff, a $500,000 reduction, and not wonder how this would impact our mission and our goals. And I won't spend a lot of time because you guys hear me talk about this a lot, but it would impact our ability to care about all kids. We've just talked about taking reading out of Harold in the high school. We talked about taking numeracy out of Harold, and we talked about taking wood, family, and all those for that opportunity kids. We still deeply care about people, but this notion about all kids, that a wood matters as much as an AP class, that a PE class matters as much to some youngsters as a art, it puts this in jeopardy. And I'm not, it just puts in jeopardy. We would always, foundational, do the best we can. But what about our goals? I can't look you in the eye and say if you take all that $500,000, we would meet our best practice in all areas of operation. It would impact our ability to deliver best practice. Ensure High School Plus, it's a great question. I definitely raise the bar, close the gap. One of the things that we don't have social work, we don't have building level special ed, we don't have full-time HR, we don't have a curriculum director, so we rely on everybody doing a piece of all that. So if we just increase class size, reduce teachers, how much more time or energy we can in this notion of curriculum development, because we rely on everybody, is an open question. How much ability we can differentiate when we increase, it's just an open question. So, I can't say that our mission would fail, but I can say it would stress and it would put that in jeopardy. Question, does this do what you asked me to do?
Questions for Steve
Yeah.
on any of the information that he shared in terms of the various buildings and things like that? Clarifications on it?
I think it's just a lot to absorb.
Yeah.
It's not something that you can just,
No, I get it,
Jump
and it's
at.
impactful and it's serious stuff.
yeah, you can't just,
Yes, sir.
To be clear, you prioritized, I mean, you didn't just pick a teacher, any teacher, you prioritized under a terrible situation, what would be the least terrible in each particular case, right?
Correct. But to be by teacher,
Right.
right? We didn't take, last year on tiers, you would have seen some middle school sports, and you would have, right, you know what I mean? We didn't do that. We just did teachers, but yes. We spent our time trying to stay within minimum standards, within our CBA, within the NEASC accreditation, and with our certification. With those guidelines, this is what we would do. Yes.
Can I ask a question? I'm sorry, I wasn't here last week. It's probably for business. I'm trying to understand how we got here. So I don't know if this is the question for the board, maybe. The first meeting, we talked about adding teachers. We talked about increased enrollment. How did we get, and I apologize for not being here, but how did we get from there to now all of a sudden talking about cutting? Is this an exercise? Are we just trying to understand what it would look like if we cut teachers, or?
I think
I don't know.
We
I
gave
just
Steve
don't
direction.
understand.
We gave Steve direction to take a look at what this would look like in the context of the fact that the most significant part of our budget is made up of personnel and salaries and benefits. And so to look at where the biggest part of our budget is and what that would look like, we chose by building just to do a sampling of what that would look like instead of focusing on one particular thing. But the most important piece, and I think this is my takeaway from going through this, and again, thank you to Michelle and Steve and the administrators for going through this exercise, because it's not an easy one, is that when you look at reducing personnel in buildings in a way that I think collaterally impacts so many aspects of how we deliver education in this community, and how significantly this would change the experience of students who are currently receiving an education in Hopkinton to students who would be receiving an education in the future if these changes, if these cuts were made, to me is compelling, and something that I can't in good conscience support, at 100% of what that looks like. That being said, I just think that the sort of the waterfall of risk is very high. The downside of reducing at the elementary level, where then all of a sudden we're not catching students because we have reduced time spent with staff and students in terms of time to be able to address those issues earlier, I think only increases the risk of issues later. And then what? And we just don't have the resources further down the chain, if you will, to be able to pick that up and address it. I think that at the end of the day, we're setting ourselves up for a very, very sort of precarious situation with the way that we support our students. And it does, I think, Steve's right, it does fundamentally change the way that we provide resources to our students. And we've shown, when we added the numeracy specialist, when we added literacy, I was on the board when we added literacy 10 to 11 years ago, and the significant progress that we saw, even relatively quickly in terms of being able to get students to a point where they could progress in a way that they became less of a risk further down the road. I remember us talking about statistics about how much that improved the way we're able to deliver services further down the chain, if you will, as they moved up through the district. So I look at it as a situation of that the risk for me is way too high to say that this is the answer. How's that sound? I think that obviously it's one piece of a snapshot of of an approach, if you will. I just don't know, I just don't feel comfortable in supporting the idea of going this approach all in, without exploring with Steve, you know, where there might be some other areas that we can find, so that, you know, that he can find some savings, that would mitigate, the fact that the need to look at something this drastic. I mean, I just don't know if, in the long run, if it's the best decision for our community, for what our community expects in terms of the education that their students are receiving. But I appreciate going through the exercise. I think that it's something we needed to look at just to see. And I'd be, you know, anxious to hear feedback from the other board members on what, you know, what their thoughts are. It doesn't sit well with me. How's that sound? It does not make me feel comfortable at all.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Liz, and I'm searching for, like, what's our goal as a board? Like, where are we trying to get to? 'Cause we've heard a lot of presentation, we've gotten a lot of numbers, and this is a good and interesting exercise. But what we haven't talked about is actually where we're trying to get the budget to, because I think if we have a goal where we're trying to get the budget to, then we can start talking about what our options in order for us to start driving towards that result. And so, like, the budget that we have in front of us is about a 6% increase on the expense side, and then a loss of, I mean, it's like $100,000, but we're using $600,000 of one-time revenue in order to get there on the revenue side. And so, I mean, we have a very large nut that's a challenge, and that's before we start putting in teachers' contracts and other expenses. And so, to me, I'm searching for, like, what's the board's appetite to bring to town meeting, bring to the budget committee that's already given us instructions for what they think is a reasonable figure, which is around 4%, give or take. That would be helpful to me, because I agree with you. I think if we went 100% in on those, you know, $500,000 worth of reductions, there's a lot of pain there, and it's probably not something that we want to do. But without sort of setting a benchmark for where we want to see a district budget, it's hard, I think, to have a conversation about what's reasonable and what's not reasonable in order to start to reach towards there.
So Steve, how difficult would it be if the board gave you direction, if the board was in agreement to give you some direction, how difficult or how challenging would it be to approach it with what it would look like if, and again, I'm just tossing numbers out, if we went to a 5% and then a 4%, I think I just unplugged my computer, and then a 4%.
So Liz, I appreciate
Budget.
you asking me earlier, and I appreciate Michelle's work. So Liz asked, because I remember that. So Liz asked that we do, what would it look like of a 4% tax impact increase, 5% tax impact, 6 and 7. So so right now, and Matt, this is where it came from. On last week, all in outside of collective bargaining agreements, okay? But it is the other trust and the others. We were raise $1.2 million, and obviously that's a big number. So what Liz asked, and then what I get to do, once Liz asks me something, I get to walk down the hall and ask Michelle. Actually, I think you might have been in the office today. So anyway, that's what I get to do. So I asked Michelle to determine best we can, and it's, you know, it's not exact because of the swept, but with the best we could. And this isn't a Steve-ish. This is better than an ish, but it's not, you know. So if the board said we would like to have a 4% tax impact, excluding of the collective bargaining agreements. I want to be very transparent about that, because those don't exist yet. There is no ratification. There's no agreement between either of the subcommittees. We would have to reduce that number, 1.2, by just under $600,000. If the board said, okay, Steve, we want to go to a 5% total tax impact, and to say it again, I apologize for repeating it, but to be transparent, no collective bargaining agreements, we would cut by 441. 6 to 85, 730. So I think what Liz was, you know, and I already showed you 513. I don't know if that was a number, but it's close to that, whatever that number was. And yes, the 7 professional, caring, invested educators, that would be a very, very tough day. But if you would like to charge me, leadership team, to take a look at what 4% would be, and some of that stuff would be there. I mean, I'll just be honest, we can't get there without it. That would be a $600,000 cut for, and we If you would like that exercise to do, total tax impact based on the parameters that we just spoke, I think that can be done.
We're talking about the other 19% also. Right?
I'm sorry?
We're also talking about the other 19% budget, that has the budget.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Rather
But,
just-
so what, Norm, just to make sure what I understood, so what about the non-salary?
Yes.
But to remember, the last 3 years we've frozen, we've gone as tight as we can there. We cut some stuff, but this wouldn't be heavy there because I worry about the impact of that on our safety and our conditions of our schools. But yes, it would be we take a look at the whole thing, trying to get to 596, 441, 285, and the 130.
So
Would that be something the board would be interested in?
Well, just before we get to that, just getting back to Matt's point, because it's just coming full circle, is with these types of numbers, we're not gonna get those numbers by cutting paper and pencils, is what,
Well, the question's really to ask Steve that question, not me.
Right, but that was the comment that you made,
No.
which I think is, this is how you really move the dial, is by teachers, I think.
Yes. Doing this, we've done this a long time, so we can't get to a 4% without taking significant portions of what I presented. I wouldn't say we all, I don't want to be disingenuous there, but, if I presented you a 600,000 increase without having good stuff, and I did a lousy job, because I read the tea leaves and I know where this is, and I would have been awful. It would have been actually malpractice for me.
Just what's weighing on my mind, so there's this year's budget, and then, I'll say it again, we have $600,000 of one-time revenue that's helping get to a tax rate of, however we do this, we have one-time revenue of $600,000 that we can't count on for another budget. It may come in, and we may be happy and excited, or we might not, and the future board is gonna have increased expenses as well as, $600,000 of less revenue. And so I appreciate trying to get to a 4 or 5 or 6% budget, and I'm also thinking that one-time revenue is going to affect future budgets. And so I know it's more of an observation than it is a recommendation, but it's a real number that is baked into this budget that we can't count on for future budgets, just like a surplus account. And I just worry a lot about that because the future board's gonna be sitting here potentially without revenue. And then if we don't address it today, we're just kind of kicking the can down to something that's gonna come back and be more harmful in a couple of years. So just something for us all to think about, that we have a revenue problem as well as a expense side challenge to us right now.
Yeah, but I guess we've been dealing with end-of-year funds coming in as revenue for as long as I've been on the board, and that hasn't necessarily been, a fair thing to walk into, right? So this also assumes next year that we don't bring $644 million in as revenue, right? Correct. So that's also something to take into consideration. We're much tighter this year than we were last year. If we had $650,000 at the end of the year, that increase would be 3.5%. We don't. So I think it's just now catching up with us.
Yeah, I guess so, but we're not using surplus in this. We're taking the one-time money and baking it in as revenue in order to get to a tax rate that.
Right.
So I think it's all similar,
Yeah.
and $600,000 is a big whack.
It is.
Where in the past we've been using $300,000 or $400,000. So anyway, it's a big concern.
I totally agree and very much appreciate it. The other piece is that in this budget is $150,000 fund balance. For the last 5 years, we've averaged over $400,000 in fund balance. So if you decided to, or the next board decided to, Steve, we don't want to reset the fund balance, we want to put in 450, then we have just cut that 600 in half. Because our plan right now was to take that, if there was $300,000 left over, hit a CIP item, put it in tax rate stabilization, or put it in special ed. But I get it. But at least we're not at the 450 and the 600. Then
That would be a
there'd be no way to offset even a portion of it. Does that make
No, I'm hearing you. I think that the point's still the same. I
Yes.
think, yeah.
So I'm sorry, another point of clarification. This assumes that we move forward with the new positions that we had talked about during the first budget meeting, right? This is not like, don't make those don't hire those positions, and then cut more. This is still bring those roles in, but cut other roles.
So this number, the 1.2, is the superintendent budget,
What's presented.
which included a math fifth, a PE 10th, a family and consumer 10th. It included a grade 5, but it did not include an extra third. I took that third, but it did include that. That's in the superintendent budget. What the exercise that I've asked Amy to do is to take, so right now in the superintendent budget is 444 next year. But based on the board's charge last
What are you
week,
talking Maple Street, right?
did I say that? Did I say Amy? So Amy had to look at this and say, all right, based on what she knows about those kids and what's the best thing to do is to go 443. That fourth and fifth is there. And that's very important to a principal who I respect and understand and trust her judgment. Doesn't want to necessarily change, but got to do what we have to do. So it would be 443. And that's if we cut it. But right now in the superintendent budget is 444. Everybody okay?
And the other piece that we haven't really talked about with respect to the charge we gave you the last time and potentially another charge for the next meeting is the fact that continuing to work with projections that we've been given at this point, our projections do show us continuing to grow, and here we are making potentially significant cuts. We're really not only reducing what we're going to deliver to our current students, but potentially to even more students. And that's that collateral impact that I'm referring to, that we just don't know. Like, we don't know what that would do potentially to the classes at the high school or the classes at Maple Street or the classes at Harold Martin, depending on how those projections come in. It's future stuff that we can't take a crystal ball and be certain of, but again, it is a data point, it is an indicator, and we have to, I think, be responsible and take that into consideration when making these recommendations.
I did go through and looked at sections in class size and determined how I could handle the minimum standards with the current. Remember, I said that not October 1, the current enrollment.
That's right.
And projected, and that's how I came up with why we can't do second grade.
Do you have
because
that?
we violate minimum standards.
Do you have a current sheet of that right now, or?
I can probably show you the note.
I just wanna
I
see
used
it.
it as background for this, but I can show you.
Please.
So, this is, I can't see it great. Come on, baby. That's the minimum standard. So see, I do homework and stuff. So we are projected 86 in kindergarten. In first grade, that says 65-65. Our projection is actually equal to current. Second grade, our current is current first grade into second. With me, I did advance the grades, and it's 68 is projected, and 69 is projected in third grade.
That's for next year?
Correct. Maple.
So to that point, the third grade is a couple of kids away from us having to actually add a teacher there.
But we
Third
did.
grade, we can go up to, by our traditional class size? Yes.
So that was our contingency this year. We added for
But
second.
our traditional, our minimum standards would allow third grade to go to 224. You can go to 30, strive for 25.
Okay.
So we're okay minimum standards. This is Maple, 91 projected, 78 and 67. Sorry, you can't see that. I use this in background. And then high school, 67 to 69, 74, 74. Middle, I'm sorry. Thank you, Chris. And then high school, 86 projected to 91, 78 projected to 73, 90 projected to 85, and 80 projected to 75. So those are the numbers that Chris and I talked about, and I used in the background. I apologize that I didn't get to you, but I did use this information to complete my little memo.
So what direction would the board, if any, like to give Steve at this point to bring back to our next and final budget meeting for the board to consider and be able to make, give the most information for the board to be able to make decisions on in 2 weeks.
So I guess for me, I mean, I'll just throw out some ideas. I mean, I would like to see, I guess, a couple, like a 4% and a 5% reduction, and some plans for that. And I guess when I say that, understanding that much of those reductions would come out of staff. But I would just encourage, to go back, and you've done it, so this
Yeah.
isn't like rocket science, but to go back and look at those lines, that have some large increases and just seeing where you can trim back.
Yes.
I know it's not an easy task, but I think it's an important task for us to see.
But how's that different from what we just did tonight?
Well, what we just saw tonight is I think a $500,000 sledgehammer on staff.
This
Which-
would be his
Right.
whole budget. Yeah.
On teachers, I'm sorry, on
No, I just
teachers.
wanted-
Yeah, no, you're right. And so I guess what I'm looking for is maybe, I don't know what, I'm not a tool guy, something less than a sledgehammer and maybe more than a hammer. And then the pull in, we haven't looked at the rest of the budget, and at least the board made recommendations on other items that may be reduced. And so I guess that's what I'm asking for is, how do we get there that may be less of a sledgehammer approach and fill in some of the gaps with some of the other items that we may not want to cut, but we might want to think about cutting, like the $30,000 or $42,000 increases in technology. I mean, we don't want to do that, but we may want to do that more than we want to get rid of some reading teachers. So that's what I'm thinking. And I'm not saying I want to do it, but I feel obligated to have the information to make decisions based upon it, because I don't feel like I can move forward with a vote on a 6% operating budget increase, as well as the teacher contract coming down, as well as other items that we're going to have. I don't feel comfortable
There's
with
a lot of variable stuff there. I get your concern. I mean, my biggest concern is the impact of the removing a special needs teacher. I think that's very important. Not removing, keeping that, I think is important, but I think there's other scopes within the budget that Steve can look at. Maybe all the needs you need for next year we may not agree to, but maybe there's other parts of the budget we can look at saying, I think I wouldn't go 4%. I'd probably do 5 and 6, but more 5 is what I'd be looking at.
So I think if we're going to give Steve the charge, we need to leave it up to Steve to prioritize what he feels should be addressed based
Yeah.
on his work, the leadership team's input and things like that. And then we can discuss that and maybe get rationale for why those things versus other. Because I think that when we start talking about a $500,000 cut from a superintendent's budget, there's going to be a lot of rationale that's behind it, because if you pull one thing out, there are other things, as Steve said, there are other things that are going to be impacted. So letting him construct the foundation, if you will, of what that looks like, and the board reviewing it, I think is important. Instead of the board coming back and saying, well, the board thinks we need to cut technology, because there may be really good reasons why Steve does not prioritize and think we should cut technology, but he still meets our request of getting to 4% and 5%. I guess that's my input on it, as far as if we're going to ask him to do that. I wouldn't want him to go through that whole exercise and come back with his recommendations and the board deconstruct that to a point where it's a lot of time invested to do that, and that's not really, I think, being honoring their knowledge and expertise and the ability to prioritize, and the board learning from that first and seeing what that looks like.
Well, I think that, Steve, I think everyone on the board trusts you know the numbers inside better than anybody else. And I don't believe anybody on this board feels that it would be even remotely possible to take personnel in any spot. But we'd be looking to you to potentially find the least impactful numbers to get us to, in my mind, 7 or 6. The least impactful. I know we like, there's obviously hard decisions every time you got to go through this, but I just don't think personnel at this stage is a viable option. But I don't, those are just my thoughts. So to Liz's point, to task you, most, least impact. I know it's a hard thing to do, maybe to get, for me, for this guy, seven or six. I mean, we've stayed low, right, in the last 4 or 5 years, like 2, 3, 4-ish. Bound to have a tough year.
Well, you're fine, I mean,
It is what, it's a number.
I mean, to be honest with you, it's all, when you cut 596, you cut 130,000 first. So I can go 130
and
to
that's
280.
what I was thinking, right?
4 and 5.
Give you the harder number because it's gonna build on to, it's
Exactly.
gonna have everything into it, and then we can,
Right.
we
So
then can make our decisions
I
based
can
on
do
what we need to do.
tabs. And,
It's harder for you.
so I mean,
Which I
to get to
apologize.
596, I got to cut 130 first. I'm happy to do that. We'll do the 7654.
So you could do all.
This whole situation is frustrating. I'm sorry. It might be my man cold that's really speaking. I'm sorry to offend anybody, but I mean, it's like a restaurant like cutting back on buying food. I mean, I hate that the comment like you have to buy meat if you want to sell burgers and make money, right? So this to me feels I hate this argument because I feel like and I understand it's 81% and that's where we have to start, but I feel like we already started this budget process. We didn't really talk about social work. We didn't, we're not even really addressing the needs of students with the budget that's presented.
Right.
And unfortunately, I mean, you can't tie revenue to a school district. I mean, you can, like the state gives us money, but it's hard to do the ROI. And so, I mean, I'm comfortable with a number even above 7% as long as we can defend it. I think we would be able to defend it, looking at class sizes, looking at the services that we offer. I mean, I'd love to, as we look for cuts, I'd be interested in seeing, okay, hey, you know what, we could eliminate this program at the high school because it's offered, and I'm sorry for beating this drum, because it's offered in VLAX.
Sure.
We believe we're not really reducing programs for students, we're just offering it in a different way. But, I mean, it's not like an open checkbook, but I think as long as we can defend it, I'm comfortable moving forward because I have a hard time not giving students what they actually need in order to be successful. So,
And, I mean, I guess I would suggest, and this is why I started off my comments, saying what's the board's goals here? And so if the majority of the board is, comfortable at a different place, then Steve doesn't have to go through an exercise, which is probably going to be hard to do over the next couple of weeks over break. So just because I suggested what I think doesn't mean if the majority of the board wants to go in a different direction, I would just encourage you all to speak up because Steve is going to do a mountain of work, and if the majority of the board doesn't want to see us get to a certain point, then I mean, we ought to have goals before we start having this conversation, or else we're going to. I'm just trying to say, if the majority's not where I am, then Steve
No, I'm comfortable.
shouldn't go through the
I'm comfortable-
exercise.
I'm comfortable with the 4 and the 5 from the perspective of, I think the board needs to understand what that looks like. I think, and as much as, and I'm not just tasking Steve and Michelle with more work, trust me, but I think there's an element of awareness that needs to take place. And in prior years, we've done tiers.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't do tiers this year because of a just slightly different approach that we agreed on, a week ago in terms of that. Essentially, this is what we're doing, is we're now asking Steve to develop tiers based on what we now know about what it would take, from a personnel perspective as part of that. And the board gain a level of comfort. It's Matt, I agree. I mean, I think, the board being full-throated, being able to defend a budget is one of the most important things that we need to do as a group. And so, I agree. It's tough to ask Steve to do this, but it's not, again, it's nothing on Steve. We've asked him to do this before in prior years. I found it to be incredibly helpful to understand what that looks like when you get deeper into the layers. And it really does, and just, understanding what the impact is on not just one program, but across the board to all of our students, and how that fits into the bigger picture of things.
Steve had mentioned it's not dollar for dollar, but the revenue received from the state, what would have been the increase on the budget without that revenue? Is there a way of calculating that? Because I think,
Well, that revenue is in the,
Yeah.
but if
Yeah,
we didn't receive it, what would it,
Maybe
what would
80
it?
cents, or give or take?
what's that?
80 cents on the tax rate?
Oh, just the 60? I mean, just the
600,000.
600,000? Yes, 6 times 12.7, so, yes, you were right, about 80 cents. So it'd be 80 cents on the tax rate, but this number, that 1.2 million, would be 1.8 million. That takes into, that number
Okay, so it rolls in the whole,
takes into account revenue. That's the amount raised locally after expenses and revenue and the trust fund for the 5th time, no collective bargaining agreement. That's not in there.
And if we get no funding next year, it could be.
You're starting in the hole
Yeah, I mean, it's
of 80 cents.
scary.
It is.
It's-
Tough business, for school funding in New Hampshire, tough business.
Is, so, direction to Steve. The board is comfortable with asking Steve to look at what those reductions would be. 4 through 7, because 7 and 6 are likely gonna feed into 4 and 5, right? And bring that back in 2 Thursdays. The board at that point will need to make a decision on where we're going to land with that.
Yes.
We will likely, and I'll confirm with Steve, have that information in advance to be able to review. And so I'm going to ask the board to be really diligent about reviewing it well in advance of that meeting. And if there's any confusion or clarification, trying to get that in advance before we come on that Thursday night, so that we'll have it in advance. Yeah, we'll have it in advance, right? Yeah. So that we are, when we come here, we are ready to, really ask Steve to go through his rationale, why he landed where he did with the various levels, and then the board deciding where within either there or somewhere else. I'm not limiting it to those 4 data points, but there or somewhere else is ready to vote on a budget. Is everybody good with that?
Just one question for Jim. The budget
So what I
committee-
just handed out is on the agenda, is the programmatic budget. So if you look at that, if you see areas in this, I'm always happy for feedback and input.
That's awesome.
You hit me.
I do want to say that, I thought I put it on, but because this is the budget going forward, so you don't see class size, right, because there is no class size next year. Remember, we fill this out after the budget in September, after drop out.
Yep.
I'm not hiding anything, I just wanted
No, we
to
don't have, yeah.
make it clear it doesn't exist right now. You with me? Everybody with me? Because every time you've seen it, you've seen some classes, but this one you just can't.
Do you have a question, Ryan?
So, we'll do the 4-5, we'll meet the tax impact.
Everything.
It'll certainly be some of the stuff we've already seen. A little bit of a challenge is the accessibility to the extraordinary colleagues, but I will work that out with them. Maybe I'll buy them lots of Panera hot chocolate over the next week and a half. Which Liz did
No,
for me
I will.
once.
Yeah,
Liz did
I
for me
will.
once. But
Bring lunch.
they have never refused a phone call from their superintendent. So for that, I am also very grateful.
You're very fortunate with that. All right, does everybody have what they need at this time?
I think I understand, and so I appreciate, thank you to the board for this hard work. Thank you to Michelle. So when I walk into the office at 12 and say, hey, do you mind costing this out for me?
But Steve, enjoy your Christmas though.
Absolutely, that
All
I
right,
guarantee.
please.
I've
Please
got
enjoy.
2 youngsters that'll keep me home. Everybody okay?
Yes. Does everyone else have everything they need right now?
Michelle, can I ask one question? I'm sorry, it's a question for Michelle.
That's it.
Michelle, when we, so in this budget, we have like $219,000 for debt services for the bond, but that's not the full amount of what will be. So in 2022, fiscal year 2022, what's an anticipated? And I appreciate you sent out some new numbers for what a bond, what our interest might be, but what is the full
I'm
payment?
gonna pull it up, I just don't have that with me, I don't have my building project binder with me.
Ish is okay.
Yeah, no, I can't even give you an
Just
ish.
like this.
Well, no, I'd give you an ish if I knew it an ish, but, I've kind of been, yeah, too many numbers, going on lately. So let me just, pull it up.
I'm sorry, while we have a minute, do students earn credit for things like chorus and band?
Yes,
They do. So they do for chorus and band, they do not for athletics.
correct.
Okay.
And you said you'd look into a policy potentially to,
Right, chorus and band are instructional periods, athletic interscholastic is after school. But full transparency, some school districts do offer a physical education.
would there be any savings, or not savings, any improvement in the budget if we were to grant
It
it?
is, I gotta talk to Chris and Rebecca and how many can do it. It's, I don't know how many of this one, would satisfy that. Qualify that. Or, remember, it is, sometimes these are taught by non-teachers, non-certified staff. They'd have to develop competencies, meet competencies and assess. Chris would have to sign off, and so would the department head. Well, David.
It'd be
King
done
would
as
have-
that goes.
yeah. But it is not an impossible barrier to overcome.
What's our current athletic fee for a student?
Family cap of 100.
Family cap.
120 and 60.
Okay, thank you for your patience.
While you do, and while she's doing that, we did have a conversation with the leadership team about, is there any revenue streams that we haven't grabbed in a while? Because I used to, so one of the things that we did, because one of the things that's in my mind, because I look at the CIP a lot, is paving. And I've also, full trip, so I have a driver at another neighboring high school, we have to pay a $40 parking fee. So we did talk about doing a $25 parking fee times 125 kids, $25 times 125 kids each year into maintenance trust. Over 4 years, we pay for some parking. 125 times 25, 2,500 plus 625, $3,000 times 4 is 12 grand. Paving 18 grand. I mean, it may be
adds up.
something to look at. Yeah, it adds up. And what we do have now, and through Michelle's leadership, we do all this stuff through my school bucks, because one of the issues before, we don't like to handle cash. We don't like a lot of cash, you know what I mean? And so we do have a means now to collect in other ways, and, Becky and I, other districts have done this, they have provided some means to defray the cost, though, yes, if you drive to school, but some kids are driving to school so they go to work. You know what I mean? So it said, oh, they have a car seat, they can afford it, that's not always true. It's just not always true. So a means to defray the fee if there is a hardship. It may seem like I'm not wackadoodle. Some kids really, every minute, every dime matters, and they go to work right after school. So, but that is something we could talk about. We did talk about as leadership. Sorry, Michelle. I apologize.
You're fine. So next year, on this, all right, so next year there's 219,405 in for interest. That's based on the 20-year schedule that we decided to go with. And then when I just looked at the 21-22, which would be the first year of principal plus a little bit more in interest, it would be $849. So it's an increase of $630,444.
That would be full year.
Yeah, so again, I mentioned that just to keep in mind, because in 2022, we're going to pay that.
Correct.
Something similar to that.
Something similar. Hopefully, the rates are gonna be real good like what happened recently.
Right. No, that's a great point.
And then if we have $600,000 less from the state or something less from the state, we're just starting to dig a deeper hole as we move forward in our budget thinking. So, all budgets add on to each other. And anyway, so that's what's on my mind, and that's a large number.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle.
No problem.
Everybody okay? Jim, I did, before you get, I tabled the CM stuff, but I did want to provide you, give an opportunity if you want to update everybody on the work.
So we just had, okay, so let me switch my brain around a little bit. So we had a building committee meeting on Monday and Tuesday of this week. We interviewed, as a committee, 5 construction management firms. I would say all 5 of them did an excellent job. I think from the committee's perspective, I think we're impressed by the quality of the proposals and the quality of the information that all 5 of them presented to us. So I think we came down, I think we have a top 2 that was universally, I think I can say that, universally shared by the full committee for the top 2. And so Gordon Bristol and H.L. Turner are going to reach out to both of those firms with some follow-up questions around some of how they do their, it's actually quite amazing. I'm not in construction at all, but it is amazing how each firm has a completely different approach to how they do their fee structures and things they charge for. So it's not as simple as going to Dunkin' Donuts and buying a cup of coffee. It's a lot more complicated. So Gordon is going to speak to each of them and sort of pull out from them the differences in their fee schedules, what's included, what's not, and talk to those two firms a little bit deeper about the project, and then come back to the building committee with a memo outlining those conversations, the differences in fee structures between the two. I think add a little bit of color as an expert in the field, what his thoughts are. And then the building committee is going to have a call on the next Friday, whatever date next Friday is, the 27th maybe? We're gonna have a call in the morning to discuss that memo and then hopefully come to a consensus on our firm that we wanna work with, get under contract. And then that would be the firm that we would come back to our next meeting on the 2nd with sort of the whole building team to talk about where we are with the project. So I wanna thank everybody who was on the building committee and participated in those meetings. It was a lot of learning and I think a lot of fun. We had a lot of good snacks.
We had
Thanks to
some good
Michelle.
food.
So,
And
thank you.
Michelle and I had this chat with Jim earlier, so I'll post this meeting as a phone call, but it'd be non-public.
I think so,
Right.
yeah.
So I'll post that, maybe tomorrow evening, just because of just the vacation, but I'll post it for that, whatever that, it's Friday, I think, whatever it was.
The 27th, yeah,
Yeah.
that's great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Calendar, so there was a little bit of a change between the last time you saw us, if you caught it in board notes. We had the recurring leap year, but we took the leap year out. So this is updated, because it's a very, very, very late Labor Day, September 7th. This is really moved everything further to the right than we are used to. But the first student day is the 31st, the teachers before that. A couple of neat things that the Professional Learning Committee did. A choice day on, so we do try to have evidence-based practices. So we have building days, district days, and a choice day. And this year, the choice day is on the Friday before, actually on October 9th, and that's typically an NEA Professional Learning Day, so people can choose to actually go to that, which is great, because then we don't have to pay subs and lose instruction. Or they can choose to observe other classes or work together other schools. So that's kind of cool. People have seen this, no surprise, on a national election, we will have a parent-teacher conference day. So there won't be any students in the building on the national election, which we found to be just for parking and logistics, but also just calming. It's just better. And we've got, that's where we are. The last day, hopefully not a lot of snow days, because the superintendent doesn't like snow days. Just kidding. Would be no later than 24, 25, last day 17, 18. And so this by collective bargaining agreement being approved tonight would be a very good thing.
Is everybody okay with the one change that was made?
Yeah, I am, and just a question, because I know last year, the union party already said this. I mean, has the union weighed in or seen this? Because I know last year, I remember there was a little bit of a after the fact kind of kerfuffle.
I handed them the one with a leap year, but I think that was most of it. The one thing I did talk with Scott about that the item of interest seems to be the fourth Monday. So last year we brought them back at the third Monday. So this year we're bringing back at the fourth Monday. We could, if we brought them back at the fifth Monday, and then kids after that, we would have been. It's really, this calendar is not a lot of stuff we can do with it.
And it was based off of a lot of staff input from surveying ahead of time and family input from the community, so we're hoping that would quell any of those concerns.
If I wanted to go into the lion's mouth again, it would have been the 17th, and we stayed away from it, because I didn't want to do it again. It wasn't a good experience for me.
Wasn't good fun.
So,
Thank you.
no problem. So this is, I think, our only action item tonight.
Yeah, I think so.
28th of May, huh?
Yes.
Policy.
And I appreciate Rob, if you caught his email, just reaching out, and appreciate Norm's and Matt's really strength of conviction on this policy. So what this does, and just a reminder, Chief Pecora has reviewed this policy, and this is a policy that combines other districts and the School Boards Association. And so this is about, full transparency, about school events. And that the school is now putting in a policy that guns are not allowed during school events, and we will refer them to the chief, not necessarily for arrest, but to make sure we feel safe and productive in our schools. We also updated our weapons list to the statute, and provided administration with an opportunity to implement this understanding zero tolerance with reason. So this is not an action item tonight, but it's our second reading. It will be an action item January 2nd, unless Liz says, Steve, let's just do budget that night, move it, whatever Liz wants. Cool beans? Thank you to Norm and Matt, I appreciate your strength and conviction on this policy.
And the phone.
And 6 is tabled,
6 is tabled.
because it does not exceed our $500
Okay,
limit.
so it's an FYI.
Just an FYI.
Just fine. Just an
You do
FYI.
not have to take action.
Tuesday, and it's
Do you want to share
Thursday,
what it was? I mean,
It's $200 from Tween School and Home
Okay.
to fix a joint or a
It's like a
tube.
little tube in the middle of the playground.
Okay, that's very nice.
And Tween School uses it a lot, and so they felt to join us in this little fix.
Hi, Janet. Have a
Merry
good
Christmas.
holiday.
Get better.
Thank you, you too.
That's all I got for you.
Great, well, thank you. Any questions for Steve at this point before I open it for public comments for the second time?
It's basically
All set?
Thank you.
I think we're good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, for your
Can I ask
presentation
one
tonight.
question? I'm sorry, the issue is, I was at the high school over the weekend, and the roof, I mean, they almost had to cancel athletic events all day Saturday because the roof is leaking, it's leaking pretty bad. Can we just get an update at maybe the next meeting about when we might address that?
We'll see if
So there are a
there's,
lot of folks that are asking, and it looks pretty gnarly. I mean,
so maybe we have to do, we're trying not to do too much work on it because we're replacing it in May, June.
Everyone we've interviewed
I had to
has
pump my
made
basement
that their
too,
priority
city council.
in the first phase of the project. It's been my pet peeve too. So it's
It's, yeah,
It's-
it's timing,
The only good thing about frozen,
snow.
if it stays frozen
There's a
until
lot
now,
of-
until we start billing, that'd be good.
I'll just let it go.
We can't have it frozen to June.
No, but I think it's helpful for the board to just understand kind of where
Yep.
we are with all of it and, you know,
Happy.
what
Happy to do that.
what conversations have
Thank you.
have gone on.
Point well taken.
Second opportunity for public comment at this point in time. If anybody would like to come up to the microphone, thank you all for staying. Here's your opportunity for the second time tonight. Hope you all learned a little bit tonight about where we are with the budget, things like that. So we thank you for coming tonight in the cold weather. In the packet were a bunch of materials plus all the important dates, which there are still a lot. Take note of all those budget committee meetings. Of course, on the 2nd of January is our next school board meeting, which is right when school gets back. So I know a lot of people may be out of pocket for the next week or so. We have one action item, which number 12 was struck. Number 13 is I'll take a motion for the Hopkinton School Board to approve 2020-2021 Hopkinton School District calendar as presented.
So moved?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Motion number 14 has been struck.
Yep.
And do we have a need for a non-public session?
Yes, and I believe it's just for negotiations, not for personnel.
Great, so I'll take a motion for a non-public session for the discussion of matters as, which one is that letter? As per RSA 91-8:3, Roman numeral 2,
A or C?
A, C. Which one's negotiations?
It's not C, C's
A's compensation.
reputation. A's
I don't know
personnel.
them off the top of my
It's whichever one is for negotiations.
I know, for the purpose of negotiations, what's that?
So moved. One of them says, right?
Seconded.
I don't know off the top of my head.
I don't either.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, please.
All right, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Can we put Belanger in a bubble so he doesn't